The smoke rising from the hidden valley shouldn't have been there. Cole Matthews pulled his buckskin gelding to a halt on the ridge overlooking what had been, just yesterday, a peaceful Apache camp. Now it was a scene of devastation that made his stomach clench with sick dread. The familiar pattern of destruction told a story he'd seen too many times before raiders had struck in the pre-dawn darkness, taking what they wanted and burning the rest. At 28, Cole had been riding the frontier long enough to recognize the handiwork of the worst kind of men the West produced. These weren't Apache fighting Apache, or cavalry troops carrying out orders. This was the brutal signature of white raiders outlaws who preyed on isolated Indian camps, stealing children to sell as slaves, horses to trade in distant markets, and anything else of value they could carry. Cole's weathered hands tightened on his reins as he surveyed the smoldering remains of what had been a thriving community just hours before. Scattered across the valley floor were the remnants of traditional dwellings, their buffalo hide covers charred and torn. Dead horses lay where they'd fallen, trying to protect their young, and the silence that hung over the scene was the most terrible thing of all. The absence of voices, of children playing, of life itself. He'd been tracking a missing calf for the last 2 days, following its trail deeper into the mountains than he'd ever ventured before. The Lazy J Ranch where he worked bordered Apache territory, and his boss, Jim Morrison, had always maintained an uneasy but respectful relationship with the native bands that moved through the area seasonally. They'd never had trouble with horse theft or cattle rustling from the Apache side. Their problems came from a different source entirely. The Garrett gang had been terrorizing the territory for months, but they'd always hit white settlements before. Led by a sadistic killer named Blackjack Garrett, they specialized in the kind of brutality that made decent folks lock their doors at night and pray for protection. Cole had heard the stories: burned homesteads, murdered families, children taken and never seen again. But this was the first time he'd seen their work firsthand. As Cole guided his horse down into the valley, the acrid smell of smoke mixed with something worse made his gelding snort and sidestep nervously. The destruction was even more complete than it had appeared from the ridge. These had been good people. Cole could tell the camp had been well organized, with careful attention to water sources and natural windbreaks that spoke of generations of wisdom about living on the land. But it was the silence that bothered him most. In his experience, Apache raids, whether launched or defended, left survivors. There were always wounded to tend, children to gather, elders to protect. The complete absence of human sound suggested either total annihilation or a faint cry, so quiet he almost missed it, made Cole freeze in his saddle. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of a child in distress, coming from somewhere near the remains of what had been the largest dwelling in the camp. Cole dismounted quickly, ground-tying his horse, and moved toward the sound with the careful steps of a man who'd learned that carelessness could mean death. Behind the collapsed framework of poles and burned hide, partially hidden under a pile of scattered belongings, Cole found him a young Apache boy, perhaps 8 years old, clutching a broken arrow shaft and staring at Cole with eyes that held more pain and fear than any child should ever have to carry. The boy was hurt, that much was obvious. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead, and the way he favored his left arm suggested either a break or a severe sprain. But worse than his physical injuries was the trauma Cole could see in those dark eyes, the look of someone who'd witnessed horrors that would live in his nightmares forever. "Easy there, son," Cole said softly, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy didn't respond to Cole's words, but his grip on the broken arrow shaft tightened, and Cole could see him calculating whether to fight or flee. In those intelligent dark eyes, Cole recognized the wariness of a wild creature that had learned the hard way that survival meant trusting no one. Cole settled into a crouch a few feet away, making himself less threatening while he studied the child more carefully. The boy was small for his age, but clearly tough. Apache children learned early how to endure hardship. His traditional clothing was torn and stained with blood, but Cole could see it had been made with care and decorated with intricate beadwork that spoke of a family's love and pride. "My name's Cole," he said quietly, pointing to himself. "Cole Matthews. I work cattle for the Lazy J Ranch, down in the valley." He kept his voice calm and steady, the way he'd learned to speak to spooked horses. "I'm not going to hurt you, boy. I want to help." The child's eyes darted from Cole's face to his gun, to his horse, then back to his face, clearly trying to assess the threat level. When he finally spoke, it was in Apache, rapid words that Cole couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear enough. Questions, perhaps demands to know who Cole was and what he wanted. I don't speak Apache, son, but I'm guessing you're asking who I am and whether you can trust me. Cole slowly reached into his saddlebags and pulled out his water canteen and a piece of jerky. You look thirsty and hungry. How about we take care of that first, then figure out what to do next? The sight of water made the boy's resolve waver. His lips were cracked and dry, and Cole could see that he'd been hiding in this debris for hours, perhaps since the attack began. Thirst was one enemy that even Apache stoicism couldn't defeat indefinitely. Cole set the canteen on the ground between them and backed away a step. It's yours if you want it. Clean water from the spring up on Morrison's place. After a long moment, the boy darted forward, grabbed the canteen, and retreated to his hiding spot. He drank deeply but carefully, showing the wisdom of someone who knew that too much water too fast could make a person sick. When he'd satisfied his immediate thirst, he looked at Cole with slightly less suspicion. Good, Cole said approvingly. Now, can you tell me what happened here? Who did this? The boy's expression darkened, and he spoke again in Apache, his young voice filled with an anger that was terrible to hear from someone so small. He pointed toward the mountains, then made gestures that Cole interpreted as men on horses, guns firing, people running and screaming. Raiders, Cole said grimly. The Garrett gang, I'm betting. How many were there? The boy held up both hands, then 3 more fingers. 13 men, a large raiding party, big enough to overwhelm a peaceful camp and steal whatever they wanted. Cole felt his jaw tighten as he imagined the scene that must have played out here in the darkness before dawn. Where did they go? Cole asked, pointing in different directions. The boy pointed northwest, toward the Badlands where the Garrett gang was known to have hideouts. Then he said something else in Apache, his voice becoming urgent, desperate. He pointed to himself, then to other spots around the ruined camp, then toward the mountains again. Cole felt his blood run cold as he understood what the boy was trying to tell him. The raiders hadn't just destroyed the camp, they'd taken people with them. Prisoners, probably women and children who could be sold as slaves in the lawless regions beyond the reach of territorial law. They took your family, Cole said softly. Your mother, maybe sisters or brothers? The boy nodded violently, tears beginning to stream down his dirt-stained cheeks. He spoke rapidly in Apache, pointing again and again toward the northwest, his meaning unmistakable. His people were out there somewhere, captives of the worst kind of men the frontier produced. Cole looked toward the Badlands, calculating distances and odds. 13 armed men with prisoners to slow them down. Maybe a 6-hour head start. They'd be moving carefully to avoid pursuit, which meant they wouldn't be covering ground as fast as a single man on a good horse. But they'd also be expecting pursuit, and they'd be ready for it. The smart thing would be to take the boy to the nearest town, report the raid to the authorities, and let the territorial marshals handle it. By the time a proper posse could be organized and equipped, though, the raiders would be long gone, and their captives would disappear forever into the underground networks that traded in human misery. Cole looked at the boy, saw the desperate hope in his eyes, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. What's your name, son? He asked. The boy seemed to understand the question. Taza, he said clearly. Well, Taza, here's what we're going to do. We're going after your family. Cole knew he was probably making the biggest mistake of his life, but looking at young Taza's face, hope warring with despair, courage, fighting terror, he couldn't bring himself to care about the odds. The boy's family was out there somewhere, captives of men who would treat them worse than animals, and every hour that passed made rescue less likely. First things first, Cole said, examining Taza's injuries more carefully. The head wound looked worse than it was. Scalp cuts always bled dramatically, but the boy's arm was definitely sprained, maybe worse. Cole fashioned a simple sling from his spare bandana and helped Taza into it, noting how the child bore the pain without complaint. You're tough, I'll give you that, Cole murmured as he worked. Going to need that toughness for what's ahead. While he tended to Taza's injuries, Cole's mind was working furiously, trying to formulate a plan that had any chance of success. 13 armed men against 1 cowboy and an injured child weren't odds that any sane person would accept, but sanity had nothing to do with what needed to be done here. The key was that the raiders wouldn't be expecting pursuit this soon. They'd count on having at least a day's head start before anyone discovered the attack, and they wouldn't expect a single man to be foolish enough to follow them into the Badlands. That might give Cole the element of surprise, if he was smart about how he used it. Taza, Cole said, getting the boy's attention. I need to know about your people, how many were taken, who they are, whether any of them might be hurt and slowing the raiders down. Taza seemed to understand the importance of the questions. He held up 5 fingers, then spoke in Apache while pointing to different areas of the camp. Cole gathered that 5 people had been taken, probably women and children, based on the boy's gestures and the tears that still occasionally rolled down his cheeks. "Your mother?" Cole asked gently. Taza nodded, then spoke a word that sounded like Ayana. He pointed to a spot where Cole could see the remains of beautiful pottery and carefully woven baskets. A woman's dwelling, destroyed but showing evidence of skill and artistry. "Sister?" Cole asked. Again Taza nodded, holding up 2 fingers. 2 sisters, then, which accounted for 4 of the 5 captives. The 5th was indicated by gestures that suggested an older woman, grandmother, maybe, or an aunt. Cole felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 5 Apache women and children were depending on a plan he hadn't fully formed yet, trusting their lives to a cowboy whose only qualification for rescue work was a stubborn refusal to walk away from injustice. "All right, Taza, here's what we're going to do," Cole said, his voice taking on the firm tone of command he'd learned working cattle drives. "We're going to follow those raiders, but we're going to be smart about it. No charging in with guns blazing that'll just get your family killed. We need to be patient, wait for the right moment, and when we strike, we need to make it count." Taza nodded seriously, his young face showing an understanding of tactics that impressed Cole. Apache children learned early about warfare and strategy, and even at 8 years old, this boy understood the difference between courage and foolishness. Cole gathered his gear and helped Taza mount his horse, settling the boy in front of him in the saddle. The buckskin was strong enough to carry double for a while, though Cole knew they'd need to find Taza his own mount soon if they were going to have any chance of success. As they rode out of the devastated camp, following the obvious trail left by 13 horses and their captives, Cole found himself praying to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. He was asking for help with a task that was probably impossible, seeking protection for a child who'd already seen too much suffering, and requesting the kind of luck that would be needed to bring 5 innocent people home alive. The trail led northwest as expected, toward the maze of canyons and mesas that formed the Badlands. Cole could read the sign clearly. The raiders weren't trying to hide their passage, confident that no pursuit would come. That arrogance might be their downfall, Cole hoped, if he could figure out how to exploit it. As they rode, Taza began speaking softly in Apache, and though Cole couldn't understand the words, he recognized the rhythm and cadence of prayers. The boy was calling on his own gods for help, adding his young voice to Cole's desperate petition for divine intervention. Together, the unlikely pair rode toward a confrontation that would test everything they believed about courage, justice, and the power of one man to make a difference in a world that often seemed determined to reward cruelty over compassion. By midday, the trail had led them deep into country that Cole had never seen before, a labyrinth of red rock canyons and hidden valleys where a man could lose himself forever if he wasn't careful. The raiders' tracks were still easy to follow, but Cole noticed they were beginning to show more tactical awareness, splitting into smaller groups and rejoining, using rocky ground to obscure their passage. "They're getting careful," Cole murmured to Taza, who had proven to be an excellent traveling companion despite his age and injuries. The boy had sharp eyes and had already spotted sign that Cole had missed broken twigs, disturbed stones, the subtle indicators that trained Apache scouts learned to read like words on a page. Taza pointed to a side canyon where Cole could see the faint marks of shod hooves on stone. He spoke in Apache, his tone urgent, then switched to the few English words he seemed to know. "Bad men. Hide." Cole studied the terrain ahead, realizing that Taza was right. The main trail continued straight through an open valley, but the side canyon offered concealment and multiple escape routes. It was exactly where a smart outlaw leader would establish a temporary camp. "Good eyes, boy," Cole said approvingly. "Now we need to get close enough to see what we're dealing with, but not so close that they spot us first." They left the buckskin in a hidden grove and proceeded on foot, with Cole following Taza's lead as the boy demonstrated the silent movement techniques his people had perfected over generations. Despite his injured arm, Taza moved through the rocky terrain like a ghost, teaching Cole by example how to place his feet to avoid loose stones, and how to use natural cover to remain invisible. The raiders' camp came into view as they crested a low ridge overlooking the side canyon. Cole felt his heart sink as he counted the men below. All 13 were there, along with their captives. But it was the condition of the prisoners that made his blood boil with rage. The 5 Apache women were tied with their hands behind their backs, sitting in a tight group under the dubious shade of a scraggly mesquite tree. Cole could see that they'd been beaten, their faces showed bruises and cuts, and their traditional clothing was torn and dirty. The youngest, who couldn't have been more than 16, was crying silently while an older woman, probably Taza's mother, spoke to her in low, comforting tones. The raiders themselves were a collection of the worst human refuse Cole had ever laid eyes on. Unwashed, unshaven, armed to the teeth, they moved around the camp with the casual cruelty of men who had long since abandoned any pretense of decency. Their leader, a tall man with a black beard and a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, was clearly Black Jack Garrett himself. 13 men, 5 hostages, Cole whispered to Taza. Guards posted at both ends of the canyon. 3 men sleeping, the rest playing cards or drinking. They think they're safe here. Taza studied the camp with the intensity of a veteran scout, his young face serious as he analyzed the tactical situation. He pointed to various features of the terrain, speaking softly in Apache, and Cole began to understand that the boy was suggesting an approach route. You want to circle around behind them, Cole translated. Use that dry wash to get close to where they're holding your family. Taza nodded, then pointed to himself and made gestures that Cole interpreted as a willingness to create a distraction while Cole moved into position. The boy's courage was remarkable, but Cole shook his head firmly. No, son. You've been hurt enough already, and I'm not going to risk you getting killed trying to help me. This is going to be hard enough without worrying about you getting caught in the crossfire. But Taza was insistent, speaking rapidly in Apache and pointing repeatedly at the captives. Cole could see the desperate love in the boy's eyes, the need to do something, anything to help his family. Finally, Cole realized that the child wasn't going to be talked out of playing a role in the rescue, and maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. All right, Cole said reluctantly, but we do this my way, and you follow orders exactly. No heroics, no trying to be brave. When I tell you to run, you run. When I tell you to hide, you hide. Understood? Taza nodded solemnly, his dark eyes showing a maturity that no 8-year-old should possess. Cole checked his weapons, a Colt .45 with 12 rounds, a Winchester rifle with 20 rounds, and a skinning knife that he hoped he wouldn't need to use. 32 shots against 13 men wasn't great odds, but it would have to be enough. Here's the plan, Cole whispered, outlining a strategy that was part desperation and part prayer. We wait until dark, then move into position. I'll take out the guards first, quiet-like, then start the real shooting. When the lead starts flying, your job is to get to your family and cut them loose. Can you handle a knife with that hurt arm? Taza nodded confidently, and Cole handed him a small folding knife from his pocket. The boy tested the blade and seemed satisfied with its sharpness. As the sun began to set behind the canyon walls, painting the rocks in shades of red and gold, Cole and Taza settled in to wait for darkness. In a few hours, they would either be heroes or corpses, but either way, the Apache women wouldn't spend another night as prisoners of the Garrett gang. Darkness fell over the badlands like a black curtain, bringing with it the kind of desert cold that could numb a man's fingers and make accurate shooting nearly impossible. Cole had waited until the raiders' campfire was burning bright, knowing that the light would ruin their night vision and make them easy targets while leaving him and Taza invisible in the surrounding darkness. The camp had settled into a routine that showed just how confident the outlaws were in their security. 2 guards were posted, one at each end of the canyon, while the rest of the gang divided their time between drinking, gambling, and making crude jokes about what they planned to do with their captives once they reached the slave markets in Mexico. Cole felt his jaw clench as he listened to their conversation, but he forced himself to remain calm and focused. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford right now, not with 5 lives depending on his ability to think clearly and shoot straight. Remember what I told you, he whispered to Taza as they began their approach. Wait for my signal, then move fast but quiet to your family. Don't try to fight anyone, just cut them loose and get them ready to run. Taza nodded, his young face painted with streaks of mud that would help him blend into the shadows. Despite his fear, and Cole could see the boy was terrified, Taza was ready to do his part. The first guard died without knowing what hit him. Cole's knife took him in the back, just below the ribs, and the man dropped silently to the canyon floor. Cole dragged the body behind a boulder and claimed the dead man's rifle, giving him additional firepower for what was about to come. The second guard was more alert, but not alert enough. Cole's approach was silent as death itself. and his hands closed around the man's throat before the outlaw could cry out. A quick twist, and the second sentry joined his companion in whatever afterlife awaited men who made their living from human misery. Now came the hard part. Cole positioned himself behind a rock formation that gave him a clear view of the camp while providing cover from return fire. He could see Taza moving through the shadows like a young ghost, working his way toward where the captives were being held. Cole's first shot took Blackjack Garrett in the chest, spinning the outlaw leader around and dropping him beside the campfire. The big .45 slug punched through his sternum and out his back, killing him instantly and sending a message to his followers that their night of cruelty was about to end. The camp erupted into chaos as the remaining outlaws scrambled for cover, shouting questions and curses into the darkness. Cole's second shot dropped another man, then a third, his rifle barking rhythmically as he worked his way through targets of opportunity. "Who's out there?" one of the raiders screamed. "How many of them are there?" Cole smiled grimly as he reloaded. Let them think they were facing a larger force. Fear would make them careless, and careless men made easier targets. Taza had reached the captives and was working frantically to cut their bonds with the small knife Cole had given him. Cole could see the boy's mother speaking urgently to the other women, organizing them for the escape that would have to come soon. But the outlaws were beginning to organize their defense, using the flickering firelight to scan the rocks for muzzle flashes. Cole's position was good, but it wouldn't remain secret much longer. He needed to create more confusion, buy Taza and the women more time to get clear. Cole's next shot shattered a whiskey bottle one of the men was using for cover, spraying glass and alcohol across three outlaws and sending them diving for better protection. He followed up with rapid fire into their new position, forcing them to keep their heads down while Taza finished freeing the captives. "There," one of the outlaws shouted, pointing toward Cole's rocky fortress. "Behind those rocks. Get him." Three men broke cover and charged toward Cole's position, firing wildly as they ran. Cole dropped two of them with carefully aimed shots, but the third made it close enough to be dangerous before Cole's final rifle round took him down just yards away. Cole drew his pistol as more outlaws moved to flank his position. The odds were still terrible, 7 men left, plus however many might be wounded but still fighting. But Taza and the women were free now, moving toward the mouth of the canyon under cover of darkness. A bullet whined off the rock beside Cole's head, sending stone chips into his cheek. Another round punched through his coat sleeve, close enough to burn his arm. The outlaws were closing in, and Cole's ammunition was running low. That's when the night erupted with a sound that made every white man in the canyon freeze with terror, the war cry of Apache warriors coming for their enemies. The sound that echoed through the canyon was one that had struck fear into the hearts of frontier settlers for generations, the piercing war cries of Apache warriors riding to battle. But these weren't hostile war parties coming to raid. These were rescuers responding to one of their own in desperate need. Cole watched in amazement as mounted Apache warriors swept into the canyon from both ends, their painted faces and traditional weapons gleaming in the firelight. They moved with the fluid coordination of men who had fought together for years, cutting off every escape route and surrounding the remaining outlaws with deadly efficiency. At their head rode a tall Apache war chief whose bearing and decorations marked him as a leader of significant importance. Even in the chaos of battle, Cole could see the family resemblance between this man and young Taza. The same intelligent dark eyes, the same proud bearing, the same courage in the face of danger. The remaining outlaws, caught between Cole's accurate rifle fire and the advancing Apache warriors, broke and ran for whatever cover they could find. But there was nowhere to go in the narrow canyon, and the Apache knew this terrain like their own heartbeats. "Surrender," Cole called out in English, hoping to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. "You're surrounded. Drop your weapons and you might live through this." Most of the outlaws were too panicked to listen to reason, but 2 of them threw down their guns and raised their hands, recognizing that surrender was their only chance of survival. The others chose to fight to the bitter end, and the Apache obliged them. The battle was brief but decisive. Within minutes, the Garrett gang had been completely destroyed, with only the 2 surrendering outlaws left alive to face Apache justice. Cole emerged from his rocky fortress, hands raised to show he wasn't a threat, and walked slowly toward where Taza was being reunited with his family. The joy on the boy's face as he embraced his mother and sisters was worth every risk Cole had taken. The women were crying with relief, speaking rapidly in Apache as they examined Taza's injuries and assured themselves that he was truly safe. Cole could see the love and gratitude in their eyes as they looked at him, understanding that this white stranger had risked his life to save them. The war chief approached Cole with the measured stride of a man accustomed to command. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear, each word chosen with precision. "You are the cowboy who saved my son and brought my family home?" "I helped," Cole replied modestly. "But Taza did most of the real work. That boy's got more courage than most grown men I know." The war chief studied Cole's face in the firelight, his expression unreadable. "I am Cochise, chief of these people. My son tells me you risked your life for strangers, asked for nothing in return. This island." Unusual among white men, Cole felt his throat go dry as he realized he was standing face to face with one of the most famous Apache leaders in the Southwest. Cochise's reputation as both a warrior and a diplomat was legendary throughout the territory. "Any decent man would have done the same," Cole said honestly. "Your son needed help, and I was in a position to provide it." Cochise smiled at that, the first genuine warmth Cole had seen from the imposing war chief. "Apache people do not forget debts of honor. You have given me back my family, risked your life for people you did not know. This demands repayment." "No repayment necessary," Cole protested. "Seeing your family safe is payment enough." But Cochise shook his head firmly. "Apache law is clear. Life debt must be repaid with life gift. You have shown yourself to be friend to Apache people. You will be rewarded as friend deserves." Cole wasn't sure what that meant, but before he could ask for clarification, the Apache warriors had begun the process of breaking camp and preparing for departure. The two surviving outlaws were bound securely and loaded onto horses, destined for whatever justice the Apache deemed appropriate. Taza appeared at Cole's side, his injured arm properly splinted by his mother but his eyes bright with excitement. "Cole," he said in careful English, "my father wants you to come to our main camp. He says you must be honored properly for what you did." "I don't need any honor," Cole replied. "I just did what was right." "Apache way," Taza insisted. "You save Apache family, you become Apache family. This is law." As they prepared to leave the canyon where so much violence had taken place, Cole found himself wondering what he was getting into. He'd set out 3 days ago to find a missing calf and ended up becoming part of an Apache rescue mission. Now he was being invited to their main camp for some kind of ceremony that apparently involved being adopted into their extended family. The smart thing would be to politely decline, return to the Lazy J Ranch, and get back to the simple life of a working cowboy. But looking at Taza's hopeful face and remembering the gratitude in his mother's eyes, Cole realized that some opportunities came only once in a lifetime. "All right," he said finally. "Lead the way." The Apache main camp was hidden in a valley so well concealed that Cole would have ridden past it a dozen times without ever knowing it existed. Natural rock formations and carefully placed brush created the illusion of empty wilderness, while springs and meadows provided everything a community needed to thrive in the harsh desert environment. As they rode into the settlement, Cole was struck by the obvious prosperity and organization of the camp. This wasn't the desperate refuge of a defeated people, but the thriving center of a culture that had adapted successfully to life in challenging territory. Children played in the shade of traditional dwellings, women worked at various crafts, and men tended horses that were clearly among the finest Cole had ever seen. But it was the horses that truly took his breath away. As Cochise led him through the camp, Cole saw animals that represented generations of careful breeding, magnificent creatures with the intelligence, speed, and endurance that had made Apache cavalry legendary throughout the Southwest. These weren't just horses, they were partners in a way of life that depended on perfect communication between rider and mount. "Impressive animals," Cole commented as they passed a corral where young Apache men were working with a group of particularly fine stallions. Cochise smiled with obvious pride. "Apache horses are finest in all the territory. Spanish blood mixed with wild mustang stock, trained from birth to work with riders, not against them. These horses know desert, know mountains, know how to survive where other horses die." That evening, the entire camp gathered for what Cochise called a ceremony of adoption, but which felt to Cole more like the most elaborate celebration he'd ever witnessed. There was feasting, dancing, storytelling, and formal speeches that marked his transition from outsider to family member. Taza served as translator during the ceremony, his young voice carrying the formal words that bound Cole to the Apache community. "My father says you are now brother to all Apache people," the boy explained. "Our enemies are your enemies. Our friends are your friends. Our children are your children." The responsibilities that came with this honor weren't lost on Cole. He was being offered not just friendship, but a place in a community that valued loyalty, courage, and honor above all else. It was a gift that few white men had ever received, and Cole understood the weight of what was being placed on his shoulders. But the real surprise came the next morning, when Cochise led Cole to a hidden canyon where the Apache kept their most prized possession, a herd of wild horses that had never known bridle or saddle. These were the legendary mustangs of the Southwest, animals whose freedom and spirit had inspired countless stories around frontier campfires. These horses choose their own riders, Cochise explained as they watched the magnificent animals moving through the canyon like living poetry. Apache do not break horses, we earn their partnership. Some horses they never choose anyone. Others they recognize kindred spirit and offer themselves freely. Cole stood at the edge of the canyon, amazed by the sight of perhaps 50 wild horses running free in their natural habitat. They were beautiful beyond description, bays and blacks, paints and buckskins, each one a testament to the power and grace that had once thundered across the open plains. "You want me to try to catch one?" Cole asked. Cochise shook his head. "Not catch. Meet. If horse chooses you, you will know. If not, you will still have honor of seeing them in their freedom." What happened next was something Cole would remember for the rest of his life. As he stood quietly at the canyon's edge, a magnificent black stallion separated himself from the herd and approached with the cautious dignity of a king meeting a foreign ambassador. The horse was perfection in motion, deep chest, powerful legs, intelligent eyes that seemed to look directly into Cole's soul. The stallion stopped just beyond arm's reach and stood perfectly still, studying Cole with an intensity that was almost unnerving. Cole had worked with horses his entire adult life, but he'd never experienced anything like this moment of mutual evaluation. Slowly, without thinking about what he was doing, Cole extended his hand palm up, allowing the stallion to catch his scent and make his own decision about whether to approach. The horse took one step forward, then another, until his soft muzzle was touching Cole's palm. "He chooses you," Cochise said softly, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "This horse, he has rejected every Apache warrior who has tried to earn his partnership, but he chooses you." Cole felt the stallion's warm breath on his hand and looked into eyes that held intelligence, spirit, and something that might have been recognition. In that moment, he understood what Cochise meant about partnership rather than ownership. This wasn't about breaking an animal's will, it was about two spirits recognizing each other and choosing to work together. "What do I do now?" Cole asked. "Now you learn if you are worthy of his trust," Cochise replied. "Horse has chosen you, but you must prove yourself worthy of choice." What followed was the most challenging and rewarding experience of Cole's life. Working with the black stallion, whom he eventually named Shadow, for the way the horse seemed to appear and disappear like a dark spirit, required Cole to abandon everything he thought he knew about horsemanship and learn entirely new methods based on Apache traditions. The Apache approach to training horses was unlike anything Cole had encountered in his years of working cattle ranches. Instead of breaking the animal's spirit through force and domination, Apache horsemen sought to create a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. It was a process that required infinite patience, genuine empathy, and the ability to communicate through subtle body language rather than crude physical coercion. Taza became Cole's teacher and guide in this process, the boy's injured arm healing rapidly as he demonstrated techniques that had been passed down through generations of Apache horsemen. Despite his young age, Taza possessed an intuitive understanding of equine psychology that amazed Cole. "Horse must trust you with his life," Taza explained as Cole worked to establish the foundation of his relationship with Shadow. "In desert, in mountains, when enemies chase or storms come, horse must know rider will not lead him into danger he cannot handle. This trust, it cannot be forced, must be earned." Day after day, Cole worked with Shadow in the hidden canyon, gradually building the bonds of communication and trust that would make them true partners. The stallion was intelligent beyond anything Cole had imagined, learning not just to accept a rider but to anticipate his needs and respond to the subtlest signals. After 2 weeks of patient work, Cole found himself riding bareback through the canyon, guided by nothing more than shifts in his weight and gentle pressure from his legs. Shadow moved beneath him like liquid power, every stride perfectly balanced, every turn executed with a grace that made Cole feel like he was flying rather than riding. "Now you understand," Cochise said with satisfaction as he watched one of their training sessions. "Horse and rider become one being, thinking together, moving together. This is Apache way." But the real test came when a crisis struck the camp. Scouts returned with news that a company of cavalry was approaching, not the usual patrol that occasionally passed through the area, but a full military force equipped for combat and led by officers known for their hostility toward Apache people. They come because of raid on outlaw camp, Cochise explained grimly as the war council convened. Soldiers think Apache attack white men without cause. They come for revenge. Cole felt his stomach sink as he realized the implications. The rescue of Taza's family, which had seemed like such a clear-cut case of justice, would be viewed by the military as an unprovoked Apache attack on white men. The fact that the white men had been murderous outlaws wouldn't matter to officers who saw all Apache as hostiles to be subdued. How long before they get here? Cole asked. One day, maybe less, came the reply from the scout who'd brought the news. They ride hard, want to catch us in camp where we cannot escape. Cole stood up in the council circle, his mind racing as he formulated a plan that might prevent the bloodshed that seemed inevitable. What if they didn't find you in camp? What if the camp was empty when they arrived? Cochise studied Cole's face with sharp interest. You suggest we run? I suggest we relocate temporarily while I go talk to their commanding officer. If I can explain what really happened, maybe we can avoid a fight that nobody really wants. The idea was met with skepticism from some of the younger warriors, who pointed out that white soldiers rarely listened to reason when it came to Apache affairs. But Cochise seemed intrigued by the possibility of avoiding unnecessary violence. You would speak for Apache people to white soldiers? The war chief asked. You would risk your life again for people who are not your blood? They are my blood now, Cole replied simply. You adopted me, remember? That makes Taza my nephew, and his family my family. I'll do whatever it takes to protect them. The decision was made to evacuate the camp temporarily, moving the women, children, and elders to a hidden refuge deeper in the mountains, while the warriors remained nearby to observe and intervene if Cole's diplomatic mission failed. It was a risky strategy that depended entirely on Cole's ability to convince a hostile military commander that he was dealing with peaceful people rather than dangerous hostiles. As the camp prepared for the emergency relocation, Cochise approached Cole with an unexpected offer. If you go to speak with soldiers, you should not go alone. Take warriors with you. Show soldiers that Apache are strong but not afraid to talk peace. Cole shook his head. One man talking peace is diplomacy. A group of warriors talking peace might look like a war party to nervous soldiers. I'll go alone. Then take this, Cochise said, handing Cole a magnificent war lance decorated with eagle feathers and painted symbols. This lance carries my authority to speak for all Apache people. Soldiers will understand its meaning. As Cole prepared to ride out and intercept the approaching cavalry, Taza appeared at his side, his young face serious with concern. Cole, what if soldiers don't listen? What if they try to hurt you? Cole knelt down to the boy's level, placing a hand on his uninjured shoulder. Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But Taza, I want you to remember something. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is try to prevent a fight, not start one. The boy nodded solemnly, then surprised Cole by wrapping his arms around him in a fierce hug. You are good, brother, Taza whispered in English. Best brother Apache people ever have. As Cole mounted Shadow and rode out of the camp that had become his second home, he carried with him not just Cochise's war lance but the hopes and prayers of an entire community. The stakes couldn't be higher. Failure might mean the destruction of a people who had become his family, while success could establish a precedent for peaceful coexistence that might benefit Apache and white settlers for generations to come. The confrontation that awaited him would test everything he'd learned about courage, diplomacy, and the delicate art of building bridges between cultures that too often saw each other only as enemies. The cavalry column was impressive and intimidating, 2 companies of professional soldiers riding in perfect formation across the desert floor, their weapons gleaming in the harsh sunlight, and their faces set with the grim determination of men who expected to fight before the day was done. At their head rode a colonel whose bearing and decorations marked him as a veteran of numerous Indian campaigns. Cole intercepted them at a narrow pass where the trail wound between towering red cliffs, positioning himself so that his peaceful intentions would be obvious while still maintaining an escape route if negotiations went badly. Shadow stood perfectly still beneath him, the stallion's magnificent presence adding to the dramatic impact of the moment. That's far enough, the colonel called out as his column came to a halt. Identify yourself. Cole Matthews, Cole replied, raising Cochise's war lance high enough for everyone to see. I ride under the authority of Chief Cochise to speak for the Apache people. The colonel spurred his horse forward, his eyes taking in every detail of Cole's appearance, the mix of white and Apache clothing, the magnificent horse, the ceremonial lance that marked him as an official representative. "You're a white man speaking for Apache?" "That's a new one." "Yes, sir. And I'm here to prevent a misunderstanding that could get a lot of good people killed for no reason." "Misunderstanding?" The colonel's voice was sharp with anger. "Is that what you call the massacre of 13 white men? We found their bodies in Devil's Canyon, along with evidence of Apache involvement." Cole felt a moment of relief the military had discovered the scene of the battle, but they clearly didn't understand what had really happened there. "Colonel, those 13 men weren't innocent victims. They were the Garrett gang outlaws and murderers who had just destroyed an Apache camp and kidnapped 5 women and children." The officer's expression didn't change. "That's a convenient story. You have any proof of these accusations?" "I have 2 surviving members of the gang in Apache custody, ready to testify about their crimes. I have the recovered stolen horses, and I have the testimony of the women and children who were rescued from them." For the first time, the colonel looked uncertain. The Garrett gang's reputation was well known throughout the territory, and their sudden disappearance had been noted by law enforcement officials. "You're claiming Apache were defending themselves against outlaws?" "I'm claiming that I was there when it happened," Cole replied. "I saw the destroyed Apache camp. I helped track the raiders, and I participated in the rescue operation. What happened in that canyon was justice, not murder." The colonel dismounted and approached Cole on foot, his hand resting on his pistol but not drawing it. "Let's say I believe your story. Why should I take the word of a white man who's clearly gone native over the evidence of 13 dead bodies?" Cole understood that this was the crucial moment. Everything depended on his ability to convince this military officer that the truth was more complex than it appeared on the surface. "Because, Colonel, I'm still a citizen of the United States, sworn to uphold the law and protect the innocent. What I did was help Apache people defend themselves against criminals who were preying on them. If that makes me a traitor to my race, then my race has bigger problems than Apache raids." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Cole could see the colonel processing what he'd heard, weighing the implications of a story that challenged everything he'd been told about the nature of Apache-white relations. "You mentioned survivors," the colonel said finally. "I'd like to talk to them. They're being held at the Apache camp, waiting for territorial authorities to decide what to do with them. But Colonel, I have to warn you, if you approach that camp with 2 companies of cavalry, it's going to look like an attack. Apache have good reason to be suspicious of military intentions." The colonel studied Cole's face, clearly trying to assess his credibility. "What do you suggest? Come with me, alone or with a small escort. Meet with Chief Cochise, hear the evidence, talk to the survivors. If you're not satisfied that justice was served, then do what you think is right, but give peace a chance before you resort to violence." It was a moment that would be remembered in territorial history, a career military officer being asked to trust the word of a cowboy who'd adopted Apache ways, to walk into an Indian camp unarmed based on nothing more than a promise that he'd be treated fairly. "Colonel," Cole added quietly, "these people aren't your enemies unless you make them your enemies. They want the same things you want: safety for their families, justice for their community, and a chance to live in peace. Give them that chance, and you might be surprised by what's possible." The officer was quiet for a long time, his eyes moving from Cole's face to the war lance to the magnificent black stallion that stood waiting patiently for his rider's next command. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Mr. Matthews. I'll come to your Apache camp and hear what they have to say. But I'm bringing 10 men with me, and if this is some kind of trap, it'll be the last mistake you ever make." "No trap, Colonel. Just the truth, and a chance for justice to be served properly." The meeting that took place in Cochise's camp 3 hours later was unlike anything in the recorded history of Apache military relations. Colonel Harrison, accompanied by 10 carefully selected soldiers, sat in a circle with Apache leaders while evidence was presented, testimony was heard, and the true story of the Devil's Canyon incident was revealed in all its complex detail. The 2 surviving members of the Garrett gang, when confronted by military authority, broke down and confessed to not just the Apache camp raid but to a string of crimes that had terrorized the territory for months. Their testimony, combined with the physical evidence and the accounts of the rescued Apache women, painted a picture of criminality that even the most skeptical observer couldn't dismiss. "Gentlemen," Colonel Harrison said as the formal hearing concluded, "it appears that justice was indeed served in Devil's Canyon, albeit through unconventional channels. Mr. Matthews and his Apache allies acted in defense of innocent people against known criminals, but Cochise had more on his mind than simply clearing his people of wrongdoing. The war chief stood with the dignity of a statesman addressing an international conference, his words carefully chosen for maximum impact. Colonel Harrison, for too long Apache and white soldiers see each other only as enemies. But here, today, we see that good men can work together for justice, regardless of color of skin or language they speak. Perhaps this can be beginning of new understanding between our peoples. The colonel nodded thoughtfully. Chief Cochise, I've spent most of my career fighting Indians who I was told were savages incapable of reason or honor. Today I've met people who demonstrate both qualities in abundance. It makes me wonder how many conflicts might have been avoided if we'd tried talking before shooting. What emerged from that remarkable meeting was an informal agreement that would later be formalized as the Matthews-Cochise Compact, a treaty that established Cochise's band as allies of the territorial government rather than hostiles to be subdued. In exchange for recognition of their peaceful intentions and their right to remain in their traditional territory, the Apache agreed to assist in law enforcement activities and serve as scouts for military operations against actual outlaws and hostile tribes. Cole found himself appointed as the official liaison between the Apache community and territorial authorities, a position that carried significant responsibility, but also provided him with the legal authority to protect his adopted people from the kind of persecution that had driven other tribes to desperation. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the whole affair was the gift that Cochise presented to Cole as the military column prepared to depart. Leading a magnificent herd of 20 wild horses into the camp, the war chief announced that they were Cole's to keep a reward for his courage in rescuing Apache people and his wisdom in preventing unnecessary bloodshed. These horses carry the spirit of the desert, Cochise explained as Cole stared in amazement at the magnificent animals. They are gifts from Apache people to white brother who proved that color of skin matters less than color of heart. The horses were beyond price descendants of Spanish stock mixed with native Mustang blood, trained in Apache methods to be partners rather than servants. They represented not just monetary wealth but a breeding program that could establish Cole as one of the premier horse ranchers in the Southwest. Years later, when historians wrote about the period of Apache-white cooperation that followed the Matthews-Cochise Compact, they would point to that moment in Devil's Canyon when Cole first heard Taza's cry for help as the beginning of a new era in frontier relations. The simple decision to help a child in need had rippled outward like stones thrown into still water, creating waves of change that touched thousands of lives. Cole's ranch, established with the foundation herd given him by Cochise, became famous throughout the territory for producing horses that combined the best qualities of Spanish, Mustang, and Apache bloodlines. But more than that, it became a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over prejudice. Taza grew up to become a bridge between worlds himself, serving as an interpreter and diplomat who helped negotiate peaceful resolutions to dozens of potential conflicts. His English became flawless, his understanding of white culture comprehensive, but he never forgot his Apache heritage or the cowboy who had risked everything to save his family. When Cole died at the age of 74, representatives from 40 different Apache bands came to his funeral, along with territorial officials, military officers, and ranchers whose lives had been touched by his example. He was buried on a hill overlooking his horse ranch, under a headstone that bore inscriptions in both English and Apache. The inscription read simply, "Cole Matthews, brother to all people, friend to all horses, bridge between worlds." But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from Taza, now an elderly man himself, who spoke at the funeral about the day a cowboy chose to help a frightened Apache boy, and in doing so changed the course of history. "My brother Cole taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what is right despite fear," Taza said in his eulogy. "He showed us that kindness is stronger than hatred, that understanding is more powerful than prejudice, and that one person's moral choice can echo through generations like a song that never ends." The horses that Cochise had given Cole still run free on the ranch that bears his name, their descendants carrying forward the legacy of a man who proved that the best way to defeat your enemies is to turn them into friends. And every spring, when the desert blooms with wildflowers and the young horses run for the first time, visitors to the ranch are reminded that some gifts, like friendship, courage, and the decision to help those in need are worth more than all the gold in the territories. The story of Cole Matthews and the Apache boy he saved became legend throughout the Southwest, passed down through generations as proof that the human heart, at its best, recognizes no boundaries of race or culture, only the universal values of justice, compassion, and the courage to do what is right when it matters most.